Welcome, everybody. This is A. Tony Young, the Executive Director and Founder of Community Education Group. And one of the things that we've been trying to do is both bring more long form interviews, but being intentional about having conversations about the issues and areas which we believe impact the syndemic, not just in the Appalachia region, but throughout the United States. So I'm super excited to introduce someone to you who's in the know, who knows the know and is in the know. Aneri, do you want to tell the people who you are? Because I don't want to take your surprise away from the people.
Absolutely. Hey everyone, my name's Aneri Pattani. I'm a senior correspondent with KFF Health News. We are a nonprofit news outlet that focuses on U.S. healthcare and health policy, and we often co-publish with other outlets. So sometimes people see our work in NPR or USA Today, places like that.
Well, that's awful fancy. KFF News. I remember when it was the Kaiser Family Foundation. Is that the same thing, or is this a different thing?
Nope, that's the same thing. The foundation is our parent company, and we are sort of the newsroom journalism arm. They just had a rebranding over the past year. So now it's KFF for the foundation and KFF Health News for us.
Perfect. And like, what's your reach? What's the area? And I understand that you cover health areas and health conditions. So tell us a bit about what KFF News does, and then we're gonna kind of come down to what we want to talk about today, which is the Sackler decision.
Yeah, so the idea with KFF Health News is it was started around the time that the Affordable Care Act was introduced, because a lot of traditional newsrooms, newspapers, we know have had to cut staff, have fewer people, fewer reporters. And so it's hard for reporters to get into the nuances of health policy and get the average members of the public information they need to make informed decisions. So our newsroom started with the idea that we can produce this journalism and then we allow any other news outlet to republish it for free so that their audiences can have access to healthcare information, even if they're in a place where the newspaper can't afford to invest in that. And so we're trying to fill in gaps. And so we cover like all sorts of things. When Congress acts on healthcare, insurers, hospitals, primary care. I tend to cover mostly like mental health and substance use policy. I've been writing about the opioid settlements for almost 2 years now. Obviously, what we're going to talk about, the Supreme Court rulings, anything that touches on health and public health and healthcare, we kind of see as our purview.
Right now, I know, KFF and KFF News a lot from your work that you do around HIV, hepatitis, and substance use disorder more broadly. I think that, for me, KFF as a foundation with its information, I'm plugging you because I think that there's so many resources and tools on the KFF.org site, and there's so much information that comes up from the KFF News site. I think that people, and most of this stuff is free. Am I right?
Everything is free. The foundation's mission is exactly what you're saying. Like, we want to do a lot of in-depth research and reporting on healthcare, and we want to make it accessible for people so that the average person can use anything that we have, and everything goes on our website for free for everyone.
Right. Now, these days, most people are like, oh, this is left or this is right. But the KFF site seems to be very much just about public health, about the health issues, about behavioral health, and not be kind of politically spent. Am I right in my assumptions of or my understanding and reading of what happens on that site? Is that it's not like bent one way or the other. It's just the facts, ma'am.
That's absolutely the goal with everything, like the polling we do, the policy research, the news org, and the journalism we do. It's supposed to be nonpartisan. It's just supposed to be to inform folks, right? And then people can use that information to develop their own ideas, beliefs, leanings, however. But we're there for just focusing on the facts and the information.
Okay, perfect. And I wanted to kind of start there because I want to level set the conversation that we're going to have about the Sackler decision. I know that one of the things is that many people may not know where we are with the opioid. Some people say opioid remediation. Some people call it opioid settlements. And so what I want to do is kind of, again, level set is that what we know is that the opioid crisis has had a huge impact on what I like to say are communities, families, homes, neighborhoods, and hollers throughout the United States. And what has happened is that there's been a decision made. That decision is what I like to say is has come through decrees, and they've gone through the state attorney general's offices to give back these funds. Do you want to give me a less oversimplification of what's happened with the opioid settlement dollars to date? And then we'll talk more about the Sackler decision specifically.
Great. And I appreciate you sort of delineating the two, because opioid settlements is this like really broad term that encompasses a bunch of different companies, and then Purdue and the Sacklers are like one part of it. So let's talk about the big picture first, which is that because of the effects of the opioid crisis that you mentioned and how it's really devastated every part of the country, thousands of cities and counties, states, tribal nations sued pharmaceutical companies, whether they were, manufacturing opioids, pharmaceutical distributors, pharmacies like CVS and Walgreens that actually like handed out the prescriptions. They sued them to say, hey, you were negligent, you were sparking this crisis, or you overly aggressively marketed your products, and this is what happened. Most of the companies, rather than going through like thousands of lawsuits, turned around and said, hey, let's make a settlement deal. And so that's where the state attorneys general started negotiating with the companies, and we ended up with several different opioid settlement deals that states could opt into. Most states have some version of this where they are now getting paid billions of dollars. The sort of whole pot total is around 50 billion, expected to come over a long period of time.
Now let me, I don't know. I know nobody really prepped you for this part of the interview or the Facebook Live or this Instagram Live or wherever we're going to be seen live. Is that I interrupt a lot, and so I might throw you off with my interruption. That $50 billion number that you just mentioned, is that greater or less than the tobacco settlement money? Because I think that, to put it like, how it went like on CSI, they put the dollar down for scale. So can we put down the tobacco settlement against the opioid settlement for scale?
Yeah, so the tobacco settlement was a lot larger. I don't remember the exact number off my head. It was billions more within the first 25 years. And then the deal is the tobacco companies continue to pay out certain amounts as long as they are selling cigarettes. So that money is still arriving, actually.
Okay. Oh, okay. So the tobacco money isn't like a limited time deal. It's as long as you keep making the product, which we know is bad.
Right. So they had a larger payment up front, like a huge chunk. And then what they're paying out now, I believe, is smaller, but it's continuing to arrive every year. So states still get it, versus the opioid settlements are time limited, like different amounts of time. Some of them, some of the opioid settlements will pay out over 18 years. Some will pay over 10, some will pay over 5, some will just be a one-time payment, but they're not like forever into the future.
Right. Got it. Okay. Cool beans. Right. Again, because I wanted to just like, it says 200, somebody's just sitting here, $206 billion was tobacco. Okay. So what I wanted to do is, again, set it for scale and impact, right? So again, tobacco, still ongoing health crisis. And so they're paying out, and they'll be paying out ongoing. Do you know why that didn't happen with the opioid settlement as well? Because, we're still in the midst of an opioid crisis.
Honestly, I don't know. That has to do with, the negotiating power of the attorneys versus the companies, what they felt they could get in a settlement versus how likely they felt they were to win the lawsuit. If they said, hey, we reject this settlement deal and we go to court, how likely they thought they were to win. And I don't know the intricacies of how they weighed that, but that's probably how they came to this decision. Mm-hmm. I will say the difference is, with the tobacco settlement, when we talk about, checking the impact, that money did not have guardrails on how it was supposed to be used, versus the opioid settlement money, though smaller, does have some guardrails about how it's supposed to be used, with the idea that hopefully it will allow it to make more impact.
Right. But I think, one of the things that we've been tracking is certainly spending of opioid settlement dollars in the Appalachia region. That's the 13 states of Appalachia, 26 million people, 423 counties. I got to get that plug in wherever I go. But I think that one of the things that we've noticed is that those interpretations of each of the state decrees is different and literally open to interpretation. And so, one idea of, what prevention for substance use disorder may look like is, in one place it might be developing a brochure in a treatment center. And in another place, it may look like, oh, we think that we should get body armor because we're preventing the harm of our police officers. And so, I think that that's one of the things that's such a wide spectrum of, I think, of consideration, but also of concern in some places about what's happening with these dollars.
Absolutely. I think this is what my reporting has focused on for the past 2 years. If it was clear cut, like, hey, all states have to spend the money on XYZ, I'd have nothing to report on.
Mm-hmm.
But what you said is, basically what the opioid settlements put out a list called Exhibit E that has like 100 suggested interventions. And even that, states and localities can do things that are not on the list. But the list itself is kind of broad and open to interpretation. Like there are some points that say, support first responders to do X, Y, and Z, or it says, help people who are uninsured have access to treatment. Well, there's like 30 different ways you could accomplish that. You could start a new treatment facility. You could invest in telehealth. You could help the person get insurance. So things like that make it very flexible, which was part of the goal, to give like different communities the ability to invest the dollars in what they need. But you also end up with exactly what you're saying, this really wide interpretability, where some things that state and local governments are investing in, some advocates or researchers, other folks would look at and say, how does that impact the opioid crisis? How is that going to help?
Yeah. And I think that that's, kind of what makes this idea around the Sacklers specifically, who seem to have protected their individual net worth. These are my words, not yours. And so I don't want anybody to say this is what she said. She didn't. I said it, not her. And so don't attribute it to her. Attribute it to me. But it seems to me that I was fascinated by the negotiation which allowed them to actually protect their individual net worth. So they actually felt no true pain behind the overall impact of what their company had done. They kind of were able to kind of almost put an electric fence around the family, who were the actual drivers of the whole thing, these actual individuals. So it wasn't like, oh, my name is George, I didn't have, or like we used to say when I was a kid, my name Bennett, I'm not in it. But it was a whole bunch of Bennetts and they were all in it. So can you talk to us now about how the Sacklers played a role in the settlements and how we got to this different suit and what this means? And then we'll talk about the decision itself.
Yeah. So basically the settlements, as I talked about, in all of these cases, tons of cities, states, counties, individuals sued the companies. Purdue Pharma is one of them. They made OxyContin. They had the huge marketing push. They said their product wouldn't be addictive when it truly was. And so they faced tons of lawsuits. The company was super profitable at one point. As the Sackler family started seeing, what was happening, they pulled a lot of the profits from the company and moved it into their personal accounts. Estimates are around 11 billion. Basically, they pulled out of the company and put into their personal accounts.
Wait a minute, back up, stop. So wait a minute. So wait a minute. The company's making money. They're, they're a literal pill mill. They're cranking out pills, right? Okay. They're selling them. They've got global marketing. They've got squishy toys all over the place. They have done direct patient marketing in a way nobody had seen before, right? And so now we're here. We've got a company. They're making billions, and they say, "Hey, give me my slice of cheese up front, and I'm putting mine in my personal account. I don't want to take mine in stock and earn revenue at the end of the year. Just give me my check. Give my check." Is that what you're saying?
I don't know exactly whether they took stock or they took cash or whatever they took, but basically, like, if this is an oversimplification, but you have like the account for Purdue Pharma, the company over here, and then all the Sackler family personal accounts, like you and I have bank accounts. Mm-hmm. And they basically took the profits, right, and dumped them here because they started realizing that the company was starting to face lawsuits. And so once they faced enough lawsuits, the company basically filed for bankruptcy and said, hey, we don't have enough to pay all of these debtors. we need to go to bankruptcy court. And in bankruptcy court, they work out settlement deals. As part of the settlement deals, basically what the Sackler family said is, we will take $6 billion of our own money from our personal accounts and pay them into the settlements so that can go to states and counties and individuals. But we will only do this if what we get in return is that we are immune from any future lawsuits against us personally. So bankruptcy would shield the company itself, but the Sackler said, we also want immunity from civil lawsuits for our family. And that is an unusual thing to get through bankruptcy law. And so that's the sort of question that went to the Supreme Court, which is, if the Sackler family themselves are not filing for bankruptcy, only their company is, can the family still be immune from future lawsuits?
Right. So, that doesn't really make sense to me and from the, I didn't go to anybody's law school. I went to the school of hard knocks. But, I think that I sit here and I think about it, and it just doesn't seem, the only word I can come up with is fair, right? It doesn't seem fair that you are able to pull out profits from the company. You put these profits basically in abeyance to some extent, and say, we're going to put them over here. You have more knowledge than anybody else of what's kind of coming forward toward you, meaning these other lawsuits. So they're coming. So it seems to me that you've actually turned it into what we sometimes refer to as a protected asset. And so it seems to me it shouldn't be a protected asset. And it sounds like that's what the Supreme Court said too.
Yeah, basically, so the Supreme Court came out and said that this bankruptcy law cannot be used to protect the Sacklers when they are not filing for bankruptcy themselves, because it's basically unfair to all the people who could have sued them or may want to sue them and are not party to the settlement. Basically, the court said you can't force all these people to give up their claims when they are not part of the settlement. So essentially what happens is now everyone goes back to the negotiating table. The Sacklers have said they still want to negotiate, but in the past they've indicated that they didn't want to put in their own personal money into the settlement unless they were getting immunity. So it's kind of anyone's guess what the negotiations will look like now. Purdue as a company does not have all the money to pay that $6 billion. Like, they needed the money from the family itself because the money was taken out before. Mm-hmm. So there has to be some sort of conversation between the Sacklers, the state attorneys general, the individuals who are part of the class action lawsuit, to figure out what a new deal could look like.
Now, so you're saying that the $6 billion that they had agreed to or committed to or were committed to paying into the settlement fund, right? Because we already know the settlement fund is bigger than the Sacklers themselves, right? Or bigger than Purdue Pharma itself. So there are other resources in that fund already. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, it's not one set fund, but yes, there are tons of opioid settlements already paying out. States, counties have access to them. The one difference that I think is really important to mention with the Purdue deal is that it is one of only 3 that was going to pay victims or their families directly. Most of the other settlements pay state governments, pay local governments, and those governments are supposed to turn around and invest the money in services and programs that would help individuals affected by the crisis. But Purdue is one of the few that was, because it had a class action lawsuit, was going to pay families directly.
Right. So, I want to stay here for a minute, and I know that there are places and spaces where you as a reporter can't give your personal opinion. So I'm trying to navigate how to ask the factual basis for my questions and not ask your for your personal opinion, which I know you cannot give me on behalf of the of KFF News. I almost called it its whole name. That's like when people call you government name, you're like, ho, that's not, don't use that in public. So here's the thing. One of the biggest challenges I've had and that we've had as an organization, a community education group, is really getting others to understand the importance of ensuring that these resources get to what as I said earlier, the communities, neighborhoods, homes, and hollers that this whole crisis is built on the back of. In your reporting, where do you see this happening more or better, where actual individual families, actual individual neighborhoods? Because the way, and maybe we should talk about the way the money's working right now, right? Which is that it comes through the Attorney General's office. They can set up a foundation, or they can set up a group, or they can set up a nonprofit, or they can designate it over to the health department and lickety split, right? And then they use this, what did you say, attachment E, right? I think it's attachment
Exhibit E.
Exhibit E, and they use that list to basically figure out how they're gonna dole out the money, or what the priorities are going to be for those resources. But in those exhibits, where is the prioritization for people? Tell me how or where you see this money making it back to the individual household, to, to Sally and John, who may have a son or daughter who has, experienced an opioid death. Or, Terry, who went to rehab 14 times and wants a reimbursement for those costs. I don't know. I'm making up kind of stories, but help me out here.
Yeah, so I get this question all the time. People email me, call me, being like, hey, I was harmed by this crisis. How do I get some of this money? And unfortunately, most of the time, my answer is a lot of these governments do not have a mechanism to just give money directly to people. Mm-hmm. The only place that I am aware of that has set up something like this is Boston. Boston took part of it, the city settlement, a very small part for now, and said we will pay to reimburse families for funeral costs or things like that. And so that is the one program that is still being set up, to my knowledge, to figure out, how do we get this money from government hands directly into people's hands and let them use it. By and large, most of what the government organizations are doing, county level, state level, is trying to increase services. So like, hey, can we build more treatment facilities? Can we cover the cost of people who are going into treatment? Can we build a recovery community center, a recovery house? Can we stand up a prevention program aimed at youth in school so that they decrease the likelihood that they're using substances? So it's more at this program and services level, because that is generally what governments do. They contract with organizations that provide services, and they kind of see this as a way of reaching the broader population that they're trying to serve versus getting it to individuals. But I've heard from so many people that we just, we've been affected. We want the money in our hands. We know what to do with it best. But I haven't seen a huge response from governments to that.
Now, and well, I mean, I don't know if you can answer this, or this is that line of like, no, this is my opinion for reporting, but why do you think that is? Because that's been one of the things that's been shocking to me about this process, is the limited number of frameworks for individual families to reap benefit from this. I mean, whether it's a job, a job training program, et cetera. I
think there are job training programs that are being created with the settlement funds. Again, there are these broader programs. I think where we don't see things happening are just sort of like direct payments to families, and you choose what to do with the money. Mm-hmm. And I think this comes up against several things. One is just like logistics. It's hard for a county, let's say, to figure out, they're going to set up a process. How do they determine who is eligible and who is not? What standards are they going to make? Then they have to enforce them. They have to ask people to provide verification of some kind, like, hey, you had this prescription at some point, or you were harmed in this way. And then they have to set up the staff to go through all that paperwork, make sure people are verified, get their bank accounts, set up so it's just like the logistics of doing it is hard. And mm-hmm. for some of these smaller governments, they don't have the staff and the ability to do that. The other piece of it, I think, is more broadly in our country, we generally bristle at the idea of giving people money and letting them choose what to do with it. That is a longstanding tradition. It's not specific to the opioid settlements. It happens with any sort of social services that we have in our country. We generally don't like to just give people money. Politicians bristle at that especially. And there's added stigma around substance use, where people think, should we give money to someone who is in recovery? There's a lot of stigma where a lot of politicians, elected officials will say, they're going to go use it on drugs. And so they think it's politically unfavorable to present something like that as an option.
Right. So listen, all right. So here we are. All right. The big question is the settlement still open to add other people and organizations who may be liable, or would there have to be a separate lawsuit? That's the question that's come in.
Okay, so I'm not sure. I'm going to answer this two ways because I'm not quite sure what it's asking. Other organizations that might be liable. So like, can it be not just against Purdue, but against other companies?
Correct.
So those would be separate lawsuits. And that's what has happened with each of the settlements. So there's lawsuits against Johnson & Johnson, and then they came to their settlement agreement. There were lawsuits against CVS, against Walgreens, against Walmart, and then each of those companies decided to settle. So the Purdue, especially because it's a bankruptcy, you can't just add another company onto it. It has to be separate lawsuits. But I do know lawyers are still pursuing other companies. So for the Kroger settlement just came through like a month ago.
Mm-hmm.
They're settling. My understanding is that lawyers are still looking into a case against Publix, the pharmacy at the grocery store. So there could be more companies and more settlements coming.
Right. And those settlement funds go into a master fund, or what happens?
So there's no master fund. It's basically like every company is paying the states, right? The money goes first to the attorney general that negotiated it. And every state has designed different ways that they're going to split up the money. Okay. So in some states, like, hey, 50% is going to be controlled by the state legislature, and it goes into an opioid settlement fund that the legislature controls. And 50% will go directly to counties and cities, and the county commissioners, the mayors, whomever, decide what to do with it. In other states, they have a council that's set up. And so the council has its own bank account that the money goes into, and then the council gives it out through a grant application process. It's kind of like, it is different in every state.
Right. And so now, with it being different in every state, one of the things that I just, again, and this is work that we do here daily. Now, okay, I'm not in the weeds doing it. I'm just a pretty face. But it's one of the things that I find fascinating about it is that it is also different. And what I keep saying is, I just don't know if you know how to access this money if you don't know. What have you seen in your reporting about ease or difficulty, or have you heard stories about, or have you reported on how do folks access this money, and what's the ease? What are the barriers, or, as we say in public health, what are the barriers and facilitators to accessing these dollars?
I've definitely heard from a lot of smaller grassroots organizations that they are struggling to access this money. Sometimes it's because, the call for grants or the call for proposals is put out, but these people, these organizations, smaller ones, don't have someone who writes grants, or, maybe the director who is also in the field every day will also write the grant application, but it may be hard for that application to compete against, a large university hospital system that has a professional grant writer. So there's definitely, I've heard those concerns. I think there are places that are trying to account for that. Philadelphia has a community grant making process where they're trying to engage the community while they come up with the grants and the process to apply. I know some states have considered taking sort of oral applications where people can just say what they're going to do with the money instead of writing it. I don't know that process has been adopted, but it's been considered. And then I just want to point one resource that came up recently. Christine Minhey, who runs opioidsettlementtracker.com, has put out a sort of comprehensive guide about which counties or states have open grant application portals and which ones specifically highlight community organizations as places they want to get applications from. So folks her work has been meant to kind of help level that playing field for the smaller grassroots orgs. So you can check out her site for that resource.
Right. And for those of you who don't know Christine or don't know her work or don't know that dashboard, I got to tell you, I mean, I got dashboard envy. I mean, it is a work of art. It is a thing of beauty, and her commitment to this effort is phenomenal. And I think if you don't, I'm going to ask this question, and then I'm hoping that what we can do is get that somebody can ping me with the actual website so we can give it a full shout out, because I swear, I mean, this is the
Someone did put it in the
chat.
chat. I can see the
Perfect. Yeah. I
opioidselection.com.
mean, it's like, it's like I say, we give her all praise, all things. I want to be her when I grow up. So this question is, so as states are allotting these funds, what is the trend in how these funds are being used? For example, prevention programs, treatment programs, etc. What do you, I mean, we talked a bit about it a bit, but what are you seeing, like kind of high arching stuff of what's being funded?
So the first thing I always say when I'm asked this question is that there is no national tracking mechanism about where this money goes. So I cannot give you a comprehensive answer because no one is fully tracking this money. To my frustration, to the frustration of anyone who's invested in seeing where the money goes. What I can share with you, sort of anecdotally, from Christine's work, from my own reporting work, from the work that Tony and your folks are doing, tracking the money where we can, looking at meeting minutes and news articles that come out, is broadly there is a lot of money going to four of the big buckets that a lot of public health experts would agree, which is prevention, treatment, recovery, and harm reduction. I would say treatment is anecdotally the thing I'm seeing most money go towards, creating new treatment facilities or helping people access treatment. There is also, a good amount of money going towards developing the workforce for substance use stuff. So, doctors, but also peer support workers, nurse practitioners, et cetera. So I think that treatment bucket is very prevalent.
Perfect. I think that one of the things that I wanna kind of take a couple of steps back and talk about is what these kind of community-based needs are, right? And that's one of the things that we're seeing is, how do you have access to the information about the information? How do you know? How do you get where the grant is when it's going to be dropped? And that's one of the things we've really been trying to do more of, is to provide free capacity building and training and technical assistance services for those organizations and institutions that don't have that capacity. Because it's easy to say, oh, well, we just put out a grant for this. But if you've been running, the program that is delivering socks to people who are at the homeless shelter, who are living outside of the norm because of substance use disorder, well, guess what? You just been going to Walmart and buying socks when you could, and handing them out to people. You don't know what this granting process is. You don't know how you need to have all of this infrastructure, because I think what I like to say about this crisis is that in some ways it's like the HIV crisis, where it's communities of folks who've come together to respond, but they haven't necessarily always had the resources. So we've got 30 years of an HIV epidemic, and with infrastructure in place and with resources behind it. But this hasn't been the same with this crisis. And often it's also impacting rural communities. I mean, our response to the opioid crisis certainly is different than our response was to the crack crisis or the crack epidemic. We haven't criminalized in the same way, and we've looked for more behavioral health solutions rather than criminal solutions or judiciary solutions. So I think that my question to you is, you're like, where are you going with this one, Tom? I think my question for you with this is, what can we do to get more of this information out into community? As you're out in the field and out looking and hearing stories, what are the things that we can do, organizations like ours, to support the people who need to have a bridge to this information?
I mean, I think a large part of it is continuing what y'all are doing already, going into, I don't know if your folks watching this already know this, but like the resource that you all build going into community or county meeting minutes and county by county news articles and saying, this is when they mentioned opioid settlement funds for like 2 minutes in this hour-and-a-half meeting, and pulling it out into a database so that people can track it who don't have the privilege and the ability to watch an hour-and-a-half meeting in the middle of the day when the council is meeting. I think that helps people stay informed. I think the biggest thing I've heard, and this does put the onus on individuals in the community, and that is really unfortunate, but showing up in the town hall meetings, in the mayor's office, in the county commissioners meetings where these decisions are being made, and asking very simple questions sometimes. How much opioid settlement money have we gotten? What is it being used for? Who are you talking to in the planning process? Are you speaking with just, often it's other government employees or police? Are you also talking to people in recovery? Are you talking to community organizations working on this? And sometimes just asking those questions can help move the ball forward.
Right. Thanks. I think they've also put in the chat our newsletter on opioid remediation for the Appalachia region, which we hope to at some point expand to a national effort. One of the things that you touched on is another what I consider a personal pain point for me, which is I'm going to call it a lack of oversight of these dollars, right? So, can we talk a minute about how? So we talk. Okay, so I use train and other analogies all the time. It said, but those working boots on the ground don't.
Yeah, I just love that comment. I mean, that's my point. And like putting the onus on people to show up in meetings is right. Inequitable, because people who are doing work cannot show up in those meetings. People need to have time and privilege and ability to do that. So I totally hear that point, and it's a very valid one.
No, I mean, I think it's 100% true, because I think we have to start at the beginning, right? And a part of the beginning is that this isn't the way in which we usually see public health programmatic funding come anyway, right? Most of the time we see it come, if it's going to come from a county or local or state health department, it comes with a big announcement through an RFP. You can track it back to a federal partner, usually, of this is where these dollars have come from, and it's purposeful, right? And the purpose of it. It is for prevention of HIV. It is for behavioral health and mental health. It is for women's health. Whatever the health condition it is for, we know what it is, and it comes down through this mechanism. You can track its purpose. You can track what you're supposed to do with it. But these resources are a bit more, I think, arbitrary, right? So one question for you is how does somebody even kind of complain or ask a question about it? Because each of these groups in the state is different, right?
Yeah, so it depends on your individual state and where you would go to, like, who controls the money. It might be the legislature, it might be the AG. In a lot of places, counties and cities, local governments are getting this money. And so kind of your local level is often a place to go. There are councils. So what I would say is basically point people towards resources. So my reporting is gathered on a website called kffhealthnews.org/opioid-settlements. And we have a link there to something called Localize This. And the idea is it was originally created to help local reporters figure out how to track the money in their communities. But I've heard from a lot of community members and advocates that they've used it similarly. And it sort of walks through step by step some links to, like, we've created a database that can help you find how much your county or city has already received in settlement dollars. And then a database of if your state has a council, who sits on that council and what is their website. So you can use some of that. Absolutely use Christine's website to figure out, who is controlling your money. And that can tell you where to go. But I do want to say, you brought up the topic of enforcement. And I agree with the phrase lack of enforcement or oversight. The national settlement agreements, the only enforcement that's really in those documents is that the companies that settled, they can, if they feel a state is not spending at least 85% of the money they received on opioid settlement, opioid remediation, which is the deal, then companies can go back and say, hey, we want to pay the states less in the future. But I think a lot of legal experts say, it's really unlikely that they don't think the companies are going to be monitoring that closely or want to go back and bring this into court. They paid, they want to move on. And so it has ended up sort of in the hands of advocates, people in the community. Some states have passed laws and things to be stricter, but there's not a comprehensive oversight body that's going to, see this happening in every state. There's not a federal role yet.
Well, I mean, and there you have it. I walked you right to the horse. I walked the horse right to the water, right? And that's what I wanted to talk about: federal oversight. Now, we can't have federal oversight because this was done in the courts, and there are decrees, right? And that is why we can't say federales come in. But here's where I think it's just counterintuitive, right? If the United States government spends a gazillion dollars, my professional opinion and analysis got me to a gazillion dollars, on substance use disorder, behavioral health, prevention programs, treatment facilities, rural communities, substance abuse. They got R Corp, they got this Corp, they got that Corp program to address substance use disorder in this country. You got the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. You've got work that's going on out of HRSA's Office on Rural Health, particularly addressing the opioid crisis there. You've got programs that are coming out of Indian Health Services. I mean, you got a lot, CDC, you got a lot of federal agencies that are saying this is a problem for this country and we are full-throated putting our weight behind it. But it doesn't seem that it's a plan in place to say, here's where all the opioid remediation and settlement dollars are, and here's what we're going to do. And not that we're going to oversee this money, but that what we're going to do is make sure that these things are working in concert with each other, that they're complementary, that we are not necessarily doing the same thing in the same town, but maybe if we're building a treatment center, maybe this money is to build programs. If we're building programs, maybe this money is to buy a van. Maybe, help me understand, are you seeing that kind of balancing act anywhere? Because shameless plug, but that's I'm trying to push our team to say, this is the conversation we need to have with the federal government. Not oversight, but this.
Yeah, I think when I have gone to the Office of National Drug Control Policy, which is the White House main arm about substance use and drug trafficking and stuff, they will generally say that they try to promote best practices, that they're always talking to their state and local partners about how the settlement money can be used to do things differently from federal money, and sort of these abstract things that it's a little hard for me to track how many of those conversations are happening. I think there's a lot of people who want more concrete guidance or guidelines from the federal government, and that has not happened yet. And what I've seen is a little bit of kind of tossing the ball back and forth. So there were several lawmakers in Congress who sent a letter to the Office of National Drug Control Policy saying, hey, we'd like you to do more about the opioid settlements and make sure this money gets put to good use. And the Office of National Drug Control Policy sent a letter back to Congress saying, we don't really have authority to do that. Like, that's Congress has to do that. And so there's this back and forth of, who's responsible. And in Congress, we did see at the beginning of this year, a bill was introduced to try to, I think it was called the Opioid Settlement Accountability Act. It was kind of bare bones, but it was an effort to start having a conversation about Congress can pass a law that talks about how this money should be used, but it didn't go anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think it didn't catch traction?
This is not an opinion, but just like by the actual metrics, the Congress we have now is among the most inefficient, passes the least number of bills in any recent history. And so it's really hard to get things through. And so the things that get through Congress are sort of your like top ticket items, right? Like immigration, economy, getting to opioid settlement funds is hard to make that a priority, especially during an election year.
But this is why this is bananas to me, right? This is absolutely bananas to me because this is low-hanging fruit. This is low-hanging fruit for anybody running for office. Hey, We created a bill to provide oversight of the opioid settlement dollars. Hey, we didn't say oversight. No, actually, we just want to have an accountability, making sure that it's balanced with what our federal resources are going to do. Whichever way you're on the side of the coin on that one, seems to me that it's just kind of bananas that this isn't more of a priority in this election cycle, where you've got so many American families that are impacted by this crisis. I keep trying to figure out what American family hasn't been impacted by the opioid crisis in this country. And I can't figure out, if you look at, you use the old 6 degrees of separation metric, who wouldn't be as a member of Congress? A mother, a grandmother, a friend, family member, cousin, self, you, neighbor, constituent. This is impacting you somehow, some way. How is this, again, not a priority for your constituencies? It's mind-boggling to me. This is where you said, you're right, Tony. You're right. Yeah.
I was like, don't look at me to make sense of American politics. That's beyond my scope.
Right. So when I say the piece about what I feel like we need to do is kind of not necessarily have the federal government have oversight, but to really have almost a mapping being done about looking at where this money is being spent and how we're applying federal resources alongside it, to not necessarily to supplant those dollars, but to supplement those dollars and to support those dollars, and to making sure that we're creating the best systems possible. Do you think that in everything that you've seen in your reporting, I know you're saying that, kind of people have had these conversations at the congressional level, but are you seeing any of the federal agencies kind of sticking their head up and saying, we'd like to be, but we can't, or we'd like to hear about this, but we don't? Are you hearing anything like that they're saying, oh, well, people aren't even coming to us about this issue? This is a non-issue.
No, I mean, other than the organizations I mentioned, ONDCP, Office of National Drug Control Policy, gets asked these questions, so they talk about a little. Congress, it seems like there are some lawmakers who are interested in this, and there's, bits and pieces of efforts, but nothing that's gained traction like we've talked about. Outside of that, I haven't heard other agencies wanting to take a role, but I think part of that is you often need the Office of Drug Control, National Drug Control Policy, or Congress to take the lead, and then other agencies can follow. The agencies can't do a ton without some sort of regulatory or legal legislation to back it.
Right. And all right. Okay. So I think that maybe that's one of the things that I'm going to task our team to kind of look at and delve into. I think more strategically, right? How do we have this conversation with HHS about, again, and not beating up HHS, but saying we think that it would be a great complement if you kind of paired these things together. I think that we often use a tool called AIDS View, another tool called Hep View, and we think that some of this can be like laid over. Maybe we can either start looking at how you're using your dashboard that you've created to lay that over the impact of this pandemic. Because if we don't know where the money is, if we are not tracking it at that rate, I think we're missing an opportunity to create programs, but also to apply resources, like using almost like a community resiliency model, right? If we know this is here and this is here, but it's this other thing isn't, let's put that other thing there to help eliminate the problem, right? So if we know we've got now money for a treatment facility and we've got money for buses, but we don't have money for a shelter or food program, maybe we can talk about how we need to put that there, and that closes the loop to actually build a resilient community. And community resiliency models usually, come out in crisis times of some sort of natural disaster. But I think that this is a lot like a natural disaster, and that might need to be the response we need here. All right, I know. You're like, okay, girl, whatever you say.
No, I was going to say, just a quick note on that. There are communities that are doing essentially community needs assessments, right? To say, we already have these federal dollars coming in. What is that going to? What are the needs still in our community? And how can we use opioid settlement funds to plug that gap? And I think that's where a lot of researchers, public health folks are recommending that, like, see what this money can do that's not already being done, that is still left.
Right.
But then I will turn the attention to the question on the screen, which I think might be more for you, honestly, than me.
But all of these big ticket items are directly affected by the opioid crisis. So why don't they see the correlation? They don't see the correlation because they're, I won't say what I was thinking because I'm on TV. How do you get them to see the writing on the wall? Does this come from those working in the ground and speaking up, or what? I think that this is exactly it. I think it is in order for them to hear. I think that people don't know. People. So here's what I'm saying. People tend to associate with the people that like they are, right? So if they don't hear from the people that they never hear from, they don't know. And I always tend to think in these situations, people truly believe that they're making the best and right decision until they get more information. And if the people who are most grossly impacted don't come to them and say, no, 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 you missed the mark. There's this consideration, this consideration, and this consideration. If it's not their lived experience, whether it me as a member of Congress, me in a health department, me, I think I'm putting on my public health brain, but I'm not coming from it from a real person first lived experience. That's why the voices of people with lived experience are so critically important in these decisions. So I think that the way you get them to see it is that you've got to do the other piece of the work, which we usually don't have time to do. Show up, send the email. Here's what they need. Here's what's needed in community. Here's where the gap is. Here's what my program is. Here's who I am. Because again, I believe that people don't know what they don't know. What's your answer?
I mean, it's hard to speculate, right? Like, I don't know why certain things become priorities for folks and not. I can guess at it, but essentially, it's hard to know what's happening in people's minds and how they see the issues as connected or not connected and why. I think I totally believe in the power of stories and individuals and connecting, exactly what you were saying, Tony, because when people hear something from their constituent, from their family member, from their neighbor, it sticks with them. It changes the way they think. And I think you pair that with also hopefully data and statistics that show the problem in your communities and things that could help, and research and what we know would be helpful and effective. But I think the stories have to come first to get people to care.
Right. And and I think that often people ask me, how is it that I have and we have been successful in the Appalachia region? How do we continue to have conversation and dialogue with folk who may not necessarily agree with us on the political spectrum? And I always say to them, because the answer is never no, right? The answer isn't our conversation ceases. It isn't when they say, nah, I don't agree, or no, that we walk away. That no is for whatever that question was. But the next question may not be about the opioid crisis. Maybe I ask you a question about your socks, because I really like socks. Lee's got me really into socks now. So so maybe I see you've got on a fancy pair of socks. And you and I may not agree on anything else, but I can talk to you, Representative Joe, about your socks, and we can chit chat about that. And so the next time I come back, we can talk about socks and shoes. And we always want to make sure that we're staying connected to people, because I think sometimes when we don't have agreement or we feel like we don't have alignment, we cease the conversation. And if we cease the conversation, we certainly get nowhere. And so we have to continue to talk, and we have to continue to listen. Because I also believe that often when we see policies that are arcane, or policies that we go, how could they come up with that idea? Is that we also have to recognize, like I say, that we're a nation, particularly the region that I work in, Appalachia, that is coming out of its nearly third decade of this opioid crisis. So those are people that have had some residual trauma somehow, somewhere, some way in their background. Now, how we ever get to unpacking all of that for them, I don't know. But they're in a critical position to make some decisions. So that's why we've got to be respectful of that trauma as well, again, and continue to talk to them, continue to understand what their motivators are and aren't, so that we can get what we need for the people that we represent and that we serve. And that's what we have to do. We have to keep talking. And so I'm glad that you took a big chunk of time out of your day today to spend an hour with me, to talk, to teach, and to learn, and to share what Kaiser, I almost did it, what KFF News is doing, and what KFF.org is doing. And I got to tell you, I'm going to plug it one more time again. It's one of the best resources that I know for research paper, data, information, statistics. There's a bunch of hidden gems on you name a topic, from, you tripped over a rock and fell and hit your head. I bet you there's a one pager on there somewhere about that. But I want to let you have the last word. So what's the last word?
Just thank you for having me and making space for this conversation, and for all the people who joined and who are, doing the boots on the ground work, who are also showing up at their county meetings and their city halls. I think one thing I hear repeatedly in my reporting is that people feel very personally about this money, that a lot of people say it's blood money. It comes from the people who have died, and they are working to make sure that it prevents other deaths and it honors the people who have passed away. And so I think my small role in that as a reporter is hopefully to make information available to folks and to help kind of ask those questions to folks in power and share that with the public. And I'm really honored that I get to do that. And hopefully some of that is helpful to the work that all of you are doing.
Perfect. Thanks. And you summed up my position. This is why we do it. This is why we do the opioid settlement work, is because this money's got to get back to the people that this crisis was built on the backs of. And it's people like you who make that happen. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for sharing some time with us. You'll be able to find this on our Facebook, TikTok, YouTube page in its entirety, and we will have small snippets of it available for you throughout the next coming weeks and months. Again, thank you, Mary. Thank you so much for spending time with me, and go have some fun today if you can, or enjoy your holiday weekend.
Thank you. You too.